Welcome to the Optimal Bio podcast. At Optimal Bio, we don't just balance your hormones, we balance your whole body. Our conversations range from nutrition to medicine with an emphasis on wellness tips to support your health journey. If you like what you hear, find us on the web at optimalbio.com and follow the podcast so you don't miss an episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Optimal Bio's Wellness Podcast. Today, we have a special guest, Claudia Cometa. She is the CEO of the Patient Advocacy Group. And as always, we're going to have a conversation today, and hopefully Claudia can share some wonderful insights for us and make you, hopefully people will be interested, and we'll continue to do these things. And if you're not interested, then we'll figure something else out. So Claudia, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're here today, how you got started and all that good stuff.
Yeah, so I went the very traditional check the box route. I worked hard in school and decided I was interested in chemistry. And so went the pharmacy route, wanted to be in healthcare for reasons of just wanting to help people, but didn't necessarily wanted to go the medical school route. So I became a pharmacist and, I did clinical pharmacy for several years, over a decade and a half. And, I always knew there was something else I could be doing or some more optimal way I could be helping people throughout my pharmacy career, but I never really knew how to tap into that or where to look. And honestly, I was too exhausted to figure it out. So my time outside of work was mostly, watching paint dry or whatever I needed to do to chill my brain. And then my dad got sick. So up until that point, I, knock on wood, we were all relatively bumps, bruises, nothing significant as far as being a patient in the medical system in my immediate family. And then my dad was diagnosed with lymphoma, and all of that changed very rapidly. And I had never really seen the medical system from that side. Sadly enough, over a decade and a half into it, now realizing what patients go through and seeing the extreme brokenness and the multitude of ways in which things go wrong, and not always to the fault of the staff, because the staff aren't being supported either, and they're overworked and overburdened. And so the entirety of the system is failing everybody involved. And so when I saw that and walked him through that year of his cancer diagnosis and treatment, I just decided whatever this is, I didn't have a cool term for it, or I just said whatever I just did for my dad, that's what I have to do for other people. And it wasn't let me go find the name of it, or let me go get a degree in it, or it was just I have to do this because I am seeing the people in the ICU bays around him who have nobody. And I can't not do this work. So I moved forward very imperfectly and became a patient advocate. Although that wording is probably inaccurate, because I think, most of us in the healthcare system feel that we have been advocating for patients for a while, but I don't think that I would have been as powerful of an advocate if I had not seen it from the other side of the table. So in 2017, my father sadly passed away, and I funneled my energy into doing what I did for him for others. And so that's what I've been doing ever since.
So let's go back. So when did you have an interest in, going into research or healthcare in the first place? Where'd you grow up? Was there anything that were you really good in science, for example, when you're in high school? Kind of walk us back in time a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Florida, Central Florida, Mickey Mouse land. Although if you live in Orlando, you don't really go, most people don't really frequent the parks. So I grew up in Central Florida, and I just always really worked really hard at school. I don't, even looking back now, now that I have a child myself, I think I don't even know what I don't know that they did anything. I think I just was intrinsically motivated to do well. And so when it came time to start, to go to college and start thinking about majors, I initially was interested in physical therapy, not really for any specific reason. I don't even know what sparked my interest into physical therapy. I knew I wanted to be in healthcare. Nobody in my family prior to that in any lineage that I was aware of was in the medical profession. And I knew that I wanted to help people on a different level than that. And so I wanted to go into healthcare, originally PT. Then I started talking to my chemistry professors and they were like, you're really good at chemistry. You should consider pharmacy. And, I'm coachable. So I said, okay. And kind of just moved forward. I mean, it was a, 2-year prereq. So I did all the work I needed to do. And then it was a 4-year doctorate program. And, it came I wouldn't say it came easy to me at all. I worked very hard. In fact, I tell my son now all my gray hairs, which you can't see right now because of, thankfully for hair dye, came during pharmacy school. So I worked very, very hard. It was not easy, but I definitely felt like it fit. And so, like I said, I was really good at, trying to match my strengths, also my passion for wanting to help people, and also realizing that I wanted something that would be flexible when I had a family. And so it checked all of the boxes until I realized that just checking boxes is not all there is to life.
Sure. So after you get your degree and, you're out there, are you working doing the pharmacy thing at a retail, chain store at that point in time? Are you in research? Are you in clinical research? Like, what are you doing then?
Yeah. So I did an extra year of residency, which at that time and still is mostly optional, although you really are limited now. Residencies were just kind of becoming popular then. And now if you don't have a residency coming out of pharmacy school, your options are pretty limited and you're mostly limited to a retail position or, a basic hospital position. But I went ahead and did an ambulatory care residency. So I sort of knew that I wanted to go a more clinical route. And I mostly knew that I wanted to stay out of the retail setting. Like I tell most people, you don't usually walk into a retail pharmacy and see too many people smiling. So I kind of knew, even without knowing too much, I knew that wasn't really the route I wanted to go. Although my husband is a physician. And so he moved us across country 4 times for all of his medical training. And so depending on where we lived and what was available at the time, I did dabble in retail pharmacy and actually managed a retail pharmacy for a little bit. And so I did a little bit of that, but the vast majority of my career was spent in managing high-risk medications like blood thinners. So I, managed anticoagulants, managed warfarin before there were, umpteen warfarin alternatives now, but that was what was used back then. And then just served as a drug information source inside of clinics. So inside of like internal, in medicine clinics, a lot of times I'd be in educational types of institutions where I would be a drug information source for the medical residents and that type of thing. Okay.
I wish I knew you about 20 years ago because I had a company called Occam and we were a clinical research organization. So basically we did clinical trial work for biotech and pharmaceutical, mostly in oncology. And we were always looking for high quality PharmDs that, had obviously interest in, they had a specialty in oncology that was even better. But they could help, with us winning business with clients and also, overseeing some of the clinical trial work that was going on and what have you. And it was much cheaper. I shouldn't say it was much cheaper, but it was cheaper than, going out and getting that MD, to help us. So while you're doing that though, and you're providing expert advice on different medications or what have you, are you, I was a believer, just like you probably were. So are you a believer at this point in time and you're like, yeah, this medicine's going to work and it's going to be great. And are you thinking, why is this patient on so many medications? Why do we have to, who's really advocating or picking up, this drug interaction with this drug interaction over here as that patient might be seeing a cardiologist, might be seeing a GP and might be seeing somebody else, for, some comorbidities that they're having at that point in time. So where was your mindset back then?
Yeah, I would say that definitely was a fluid situation and changed over time. Coming out of pharmacy school, I would say I was a pretty firm believer. And I think a lot of that, and I would say the vast majority of people usually are, because it doesn't serve us well internally to have this, okay, I'm going to do whatever my professors told me, but now I don't believe any of it. And so it's hard. It's hard to work in an environment in the way that you've been trained when you don't believe. So I was definitely a believer coming out, did all the thing. We role played in pharmacy school. What do you tell people when they want to supplement, all these horrible things and everything's horrible. And, you want the prescription, we role played. So I was ready. I was molded and ready, as most are. And then I just started, slowly questioning things like, And then over time, like I said, my family was relatively blessed with health. And so I didn't see a lot from a personal standpoint of that doesn't really make sense. But I did notice in just my professional career of, when we moved to Washington State and I was, presented with a prescription for 600 methadone tablets for 1 month, I'm like, well, this doesn't, and also on ADHD meds to stay awake. And also, and seeing like, well, this can't be optimal in anybody's eyes. So what is happening here? And because I had worked in a variety of different states and environments and cultures, I started to realize just, even just the localization of shifts in how prescriptions were prescribed, medications were prescribed. And, so I took that. When I started seeing that, I took it to the medical director of that clinic, and I'm like, and he agreed with me. He was like, I moved here from Texas and we have an opioid problem there. And this is like, through the roof crazy. And, then I really just started realizing how far deep we are as a nation in overprescribing and how difficult it is for the current medical staffing to start to question something like that. If you're presented with a patient who is currently stable on 600 methadone, I mean, not really stable, but has been on a maintenance dose of 600 methadone tablets a month, who wants to take that on and fix it? I mean, it's a huge burden to try to fix, even though that, person wants to fix it. It's a lot. And so it continues because, well, you're doing okay. Maybe we'll talk about this next month because this month we're talking about your blood sugar. Maybe we'll talk about that next month. And it doesn't get talked about. It just gets continued. So, and then once I saw my dad, I had never really been faced with any personal oncology issues until my dad got sick. And then I just realized, that's a whole different beast of questions needing to be asked. So yes, it was a journey of being the molded, do whatever I was told to do and say whatever I was told to say. And now I'm like the rogue pharmacist who I'm probably off the walls of the pharmacy school now. I don't know.
So you hear these days, one side talks about, the undue influence pharmaceutical, firms have on the FDA and, and their donors in some of these big med schools and what have you. Looking back on it now, based on what you hear these days, I mean, was there influence from pharmaceutical firms, in your educational experience?
All I can say from a personal standpoint is there were quite a few dinners I was invited to, and my husband has been invited to over the years, which that has waned over time. But I would say back in, the early 2000s when I was graduating and moving into my career, yeah, I mean, there were quite a few dinners, many healthcare professionals who would say, oh, well, this looks like a nice fancy restaurant. I'll go and maybe get a CE. And, I was never presented with a trip, nor was my husband, nothing extremely lavish, but definitely quite a few very expensive dinners to promote whatever drug it was that they were promoting. And I would say back then that was not questioned a whole lot. It was like the norm. Probably it was the step down from what was before that, which was more lavish gifts. And even then, I don't think I had enough tools in my toolbox to question or experience even to start questioning any of that. Of course, now that's, not so much a thing anymore because there's a much, stronger spotlight on that industry. But yeah, when I look back, I start to see that the expenditure on, the lunches for the physicians and all the things to present this medication. It's unnecessary and over the top. And it definitely shows the wrong priorities that this nation has in healthcare.
Just out of curiosity, from a, generic prescription to a non-generic. And with the Affordable Care Act back in, I guess, 2012, when it first went into practice, is the physician still responsible for writing that script, so to speak, or did they have to go to people like you? And then is there, I always say follow the money. Is there money that dictates whether or not it's a generic as opposed to a commercial drug?
So can you restate it so I understand? There's a lot that goes into brand generic. So I could go off on a really large tangent here. So I want to make sure I'm
just thinking of the patient where, let's say you take warfarin, for example. It's been on the market forever, right? So, it's been generic. But I also know that, based on certain FDA regulations, companies can come in and reformulate in certain classes of drugs, and then suddenly it's off generic for, a year. They can maximize their profits, and it goes back on. And you've seen that. I guess the EpiPen person, the CEO got in trouble a few years ago with the $400 EpiPen, but there's a generic out there that's $30. And I'm just from my own personal, family experience with some family members, some drugs are generic, and then suddenly they're back on, I'm using a wrong term, but I'll just say commercial, and the price is exorbitant again. So
yes.
I'm just wondering who dictates the ability to be able to prescribe a viable medication that works, but is also reimbursable, let's say, and or affordable for that patient.
There's so many holes in the system. I mean, really, the way that the system is built is a pharmaceutical company does all of the research and development to bring a drug to market. They get the patenting rights for X amount of years, decade plus. And that was initially intended to help them rebuild what they've spent into research and development, and that others can't just come in now and just duplicate that, but not do the research, et cetera. So they come out. So then it comes close to patent releasing time, and so all these other companies are like clamoring for, I'm going to start making the generic of this medication, and so they get the generic approved, and so now you've got multiple generics of that brand. Well, that original company or another company says, well, what if we just tweak that a little bit and do an isomer of it or make a cousin of it, and we'll show that it's even just a little bit better in studies, which we all know, studies can be very, very deceiving. And even in peer-reviewed journals, there's always some, nuance that is in their favor. And there may have been a multitude of studies that didn't show any benefit, but, you've got one or two that did. And so that's what's going to get published and put in, mainstream media. And so there is endless amounts of this happening within the industry. So they tweak it a little bit. As long as it's considered a new drug by the FDA, then now we're starting all over again. We have a brand new patent. We get X amount of years of patent protection, and it's, a ton more money. And the insurance companies, when they review what their formulary is going to be, they're like, well, this doesn't make sense. Why would we cover this? It's just a sister or a cousin or what, a slight shift in the original medication. So we aren't going to cover it. But the physicians don't know that. They're not, how would they ever keep up with every insurance plan and every insurance plan's formulary? There's no chance. So the patient goes in to get their prescription. Maybe the pharmaceutical company just came in last week and said, here's why this one's better. Doctors trying to, I like to believe that most doctors are trying to do the right thing. Okay. So they're presented with this, evidence that supports this drug over the other one. They think, well, why not? Why not give my patient an option to do something better if this is what this drug rep showed me? They have no idea what is now going to happen on the pharmacy end, on the insurance end, just all of the drama that happens. Now it's not going to be covered. It needs a prior authorization. You need justification. There's never going to be a justification for this medication, because it doesn't make any sense. It shouldn't even have come out on the market to begin with. So that's not going to be justified. And so it's just a ridiculous amount of hassle. So some physicians are seasoned enough now and know, like, okay, this is probably what's going to happen. So we're just not going to go this route. And we'll explain that to the patient. There's some new ones out, but hey, they're not different enough. your insurance isn't going to cover it. We're going to go with the generic that's available because I have no concerns over it. Now, with the brand generic discussion, there are some times, I would say they're mostly in the minority of times, but there are some times when the inactive ingredients or the excipients in the actual tablet, pill, capsule, whatever, they're going to be different because they can be. So the brand may have, the brand tablet might not have lactose and the generic might have lactose or whatever it is. So it's very possible that somebody may not tolerate the generic, but they do tolerate the brand. And in that case, justification can be given to the insurance company, and, a good amount of times they will allow that because they have tried and failed the generic. But you would have to try and fail, give reason, and then get that covered. But just endless amounts of unnecessary drama around brand generics, really all boiling down to who's making money and who just doesn't know how to guide these patients through this, because the doctors think they're doing the right thing. They don't know what happens at the pharmacy end.
So like you, I lost my father to cancer back when I was 23, and he died of lung cancer. And I remember looking back at it now and being in the industry for, 25 years in cancer research, it wasn't that long ago, but he got diagnosed, and then they immediately went ahead and did surgery. I mean, they didn't do any scans. They didn't of the head or, bone or anything like that. And he'd already metastasized, but they didn't know it. But they did the surgery, took his lung out. And I remember the first time I had an experience with an advocate, so to speak, but she technically was the social worker that was dealing with the family. And really she was doing her best, but the only thing that she was really trying to tell us was, your father's got about a 10% chance of living. And so in her roundabout way during that time, she was preparing us for the inevitable. Of course, I thought, well, he'll be in the top 10%. So, he'll beat this thing, even though it was, metastasized and stage 4 and all that good stuff. And after that, it was quick, thank God. And, then I didn't really have any exposure until my grandmother, so my father's mother, who was in her 90s at that time, she, went into independent living, and, she was perfectly healthy for the most part, with the exception of, she had some heart palpitations or whatever. So they started putting her on warfarin. And, of course, as every time you bump into something, you got these bruises all over the place and everything else. And, over time, she just got progressively worse, not because of the medication, just simply because she was older. And, we had to then, try to figure out where to put her into an assisted living facility and which one's good, which one's not. And then, of course, as these elderly get into these assisted living facilities, and it's basically a menu of medication that they're on every single day. And I personally believe that at the end of the day, it's probably the drug interaction that ends up leading to the demise more than it is anything else. And I always thought to myself, it'd be great to have an advocate where I could pay, to be able to, figure out medications, figure out where the best place to go, interact with, the different types of doctors and so on and so forth. So I assume you felt the same way, and therefore you have your own company at this point in time. So tell us, what do you do for that common family out there that, went through an experience like I described, went through a personal experience like you described as well?
Yeah, all the things that you just said. In a lot of ways, I do find it sad that somebody like me is even needed. And I long for a day that I'm not, because it seems ridiculous that you would need to have a additional layer in your healthcare that is overlooking everything, because we all like to believe that the system's working for us and things are working, but the reality is they're not. So whether or not we believe that, that's the truth. It's just not working. And so I guess the best way to explain it is by actual examples, without obviously sharing any identifiers. But one of my first clients was an adult child. So, my age, somebody living, out of the state from his parents, and his elderly dad, just got sick, wasn't feeling well. Otherwise, prior to this, doing perfectly fine, working out stronger than I am right now. Just, very healthy person, active. And all of a sudden started not feeling well. Well, they were living in a relatively remote area and didn't have access to a lot of great care in the immediate surrounding areas. And so, when you go to the hospital in these smaller towns, you have to realize when physicians are at their peak and they're, either coming right out of school or they're a couple years out and, they're gunners and they want to change the world, right? They aren't going most of the time to the remote towns. They're going to large academic centers to further their knowledge, experience, education, etc. Most of the time, again, it's never a blanket statement, but most of the time, the smaller towns are getting the people, wanting, they're, later in their career, wanting to get closer to family. Maybe they're from that town maybe they're going to run the hospital and they're just nearing retirement. Okay. So you have to just understand the climate of the healthcare system to realize it's not the same everywhere. It's just not. You're not going to get the same level of care, the same level of expertise at a large academic center as you are at a small center. So, I'm understanding this, and they aren't necessarily, because they were healthy before, it didn't really need a lot of, complicated healthcare. So in any case, I'm realizing that we are quickly exhausting the options that are in a driving radius for him. And, recognizing that, realizing that he's being dismissed for a lot of what's happening in his care. And we need to get to a larger medical center, either where I was, which was about 2 hours north, or where he could go, which is about an hour and a half to 2 hours south. So either way, we were going to drive about the same distance. He decided to come up closer to me, which was great because I could actually then physically be in the hospital and visit. And he ended up needing open heart surgery. He needed his valves replaced in his heart. And he had a very extensive infection on his valves. Nobody caught it. Nobody was going to catch it. Cardiology down where he was didn't want to see him for, another 2 months. And it just wasn't going to happen. And you realize at some point, we don't have time to wait to find somebody great near you. I don't think we're going to, and I don't think we need to just move. We need to drive. And sometimes that means flying, but for him, it was a drivable distance. So he's perfectly happy, called me after, like, new lease on life. Now, I didn't do the surgery, but I knew how to get him to the care he needed to do. So, to have. So that's one example. And then, throughout my career, every case is so extreme, and I'm sure you can understand, so extremely different. There's so little that's the same because there's just so many nuances for each person. But I was involved in another case where a very high functioning, technical worker, in her late 40s, no reason to be this ill. I got called into the case and she had very extreme complications from a surgery. And by the time I got to her, she was in an environment very much like you mentioned, with regard to the long-term care facilities, and, was like slumped over in a wheelchair in the hallway, and that was pretty much going to be her life. And nobody was really being proactive. It kind of became like, okay, well, this is where she's at. It's unfortunate this has happened. And, when I started really diving deeper into what's happened in this case and where were the balls dropped, and, we needed to get, number one, we needed to get out of that facility. That facility was awful. And so, put the work into place, and, I just actually heard recently that she went back to work for the same company that she was originally with, which is fantastic because the system had written her off completely. That she was just going to be, basically a vegetable, which was terrible. So there's just so much that is missed, so many errors that are made. And again, like I said, I like to believe vast majority of people go into medicine because they want to help people. I don't think the system supports the staff. And so they don't have the wherewithal and the bandwidth to do what they have to do. And the provider for that last client that I just told you about, I actually approached her, on the phone, but I was like, look, she came in with XYZ deficiency. She's been here a month and has not received anything to correct that deficiency. And she goes, look, I don't know what to tell you, but I don't have any time to look at these things. Like I'm overworked. The person who was my partner is not here, and I don't know what else to say, but it didn't get done. I mean, that's it. I don't know what to tell you, and you can't even believe it until you hear it. You just can't even imagine that this is what's happening. And so I hate to put blame on any one part of the system. I think the system as a whole is broken in so many ways that I don't want the providers to feel like we're attacking them either, but somebody has to look out for these people. So, a lot of insurance systems, healthcare systems are putting advocates into place. But the issue with the advocate that's employed by these people is there is a conflict of interest, obviously. So although there will be an additional layer of maybe, eyes on things, they can only call out so much without being in trouble, right? So without calling out errors and putting people into trouble. So, it's a step forward, but a really small baby step and not the best option.
Yeah, it seems like this problem has exploded in the last 10 or 15 years. And, in the old days, your GP would figure out what's wrong with you, refer you to a specialist, maybe get transferred to the specialist at some point in time. But then if you ended up going to the hospital, your GP or your specialist made the rounds in the hospital, and he or she was your doctor at the hospital. But now you have the hospitalists. So it's like everybody just passes the baton, right? And that's, I think, where this giant void is. And, I have my thoughts on this, but I'm just curious on your thoughts with being in the system, what have you. I mean, I know it's probably money driven as always, but was that, what was the fundamental reason why that whole thing changed? Was the physicians didn't have enough time anymore, or, what happened?
A lot of breakdowns. Insurance companies and reimbursements there's a lot of pieces to this. One is the reimbursement from insurance companies is relatively low. So if an office visit is, I don't know, $150, the insurance company might, it's a small percentage that they're going to get back from that. And so for the facility to maintain its, all of its things, its overhead, its CEO getting paid, whatever, all the things, then we have to see more people. We have to double book. We have to see more people. So when I got out of school, concierge, sort of primary care physicians were a thing, but they were very cost prohibitive to most people. So you had to pay like several $1,000s to be a member of this concierge practice where they would keep a small number of patients. And so that was starting to become a thing because it was already becoming a small issue. And now it's such a much, much bigger issue that direct primary care has grown out of this, which I'm a huge fan of. I think it's a great option because it's a flat monthly fee. It takes out the insurance company completely. So, you pay, depending on your age, usually, let's say you pay $100 if you're, 65 and over or whatever, a month, typically with no contract. And you have access to that physician, technically 24/7, but they're probably not going to respond to you, about your prescription refill at 3 a.m. Hopefully they're sleeping. But, you've got access to them. And instead of having 4,000 patients per physician, now it's 400 to 600 patients per physician, which sounds already too many, but 4,000 is more of an average of a traditional setting. And so we're moving away from that into this type of a model. Now, that model also is potentially cost prohibitive to a lot of people. And so that isn't accessible to everybody. But for those who could allocate that amount of funds, that's what would happen. And that's kind of what we're moving away from. Most people who want to give better care are trying to move away from having any dictation of insurance reimbursements. And now I've got to see more people to stay alive. And it's just a nightmare. And then they've got to pay staff to be the ones dealing with the insurance companies. And so it doesn't make any sense. So what if we just took them out completely, had a smaller panel of patients? And so that's where we're moving.
In reference to your business, when you're advocating for a family, whether it's directly with the provider or the hospital or insurance companies, are you welcomed, or are you met with hostility?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm Italian, so I never worried about that. But as I am teaching the future generations of pharmacists wanting to become and non-pharmacists wanting to become advocates, I realize that they are concerned about this. I've never been concerned because I'm nice until I need to not be nice, and so that's kind of my I can handle whatever situation I'm thrown. But I also realize that not everybody wants to do that or has the personality to be able to approach situations like that. I have never gotten into like a drag down fight. It hasn't gotten to that point. I would say that most providers are, as I would have expected, a little bit confused at first. Like, who are you and what is your role? At first, they're like, okay, maybe she's a friend, and they'll document in the chart, so-and-so's friend Claudia, which is fine. I'm their friend too, but they don't really understand the role and what I do. And then some of them completely embrace it. Like, thank God, because now, like, if they don't understand something during this visit, I'm so glad you're here to explain it because I don't have the time to do it. So great. And you can fill me in, and you can, like sometimes I'll send them, records to prepare for a visit. And they're like, this is so fantastic because now I can actually do what I need to do for this patient when I see them. And so some are really embracing, some are a little bit confused. I would say it's a very small percentage that are super against it. And I usually tell my patients, that's a little bit of a red flag, but I will also explain to them where this is coming from. We are a highly litigated society in all aspects, but absolutely in healthcare. And so new doctors are trained and taught in school that whatever you're trying to avoid getting sued no matter what. So, whatever you can do to not get sued. Well, if I come, sometimes my clients are not, most of the time, they're not near me. And so I'm, on speakerphone on a visit or whatever. And so understandably, and I usually, try to prep my clients for this. Understandably, some are going to be a little bit concerned. Like, who is this? Is this Morgan and Morgan on the, call with me? Like, who are they posing as an advocate? And so there's a skepticism out of the gate. Who is this person? Are they recording me? I always tell my clients, don't ever record if you don't say you're going to, but also the physician should not be super concerned about it. What are they going to say that they're super concerned that you have a recording of? But, always let them know. But I always say, I'm not recording. I'm just here. I'm literally here to help this patient make sure you get the right information because they're overwhelmed with their sickness right now. Make sure I can answer any questions that they forget or don't remember of their care. And then if they don't understand what's happened during this visit and you don't have the time at the end, I'm filling it in at the end. And so, we're prepping, we're debriefing. And so once they understand, they're okay. But I do think that the few that are, against it or, not super excited about it, it's usually because they have in the back of their head that one professor who told them, all you need is one huge lawsuit, it's going to be on your record and you're going to lose your license. And so they see me come in like, oh, this is it. This is what they said. Yeah.
Well, also could be a little bit of not necessarily fear per se, but they know that what's going on, right? And whereas a lot of the patients / family members, they're not in the medical profession, they don't know, and everybody can be selective in what they listen to and what they hear and what they take back and what have you. I'm kind of curious about that because in the world of commercial real estate, we used to obviously rent space. And for a while, I did it on my own or had people in the company do it. And I was told that you really should have a tenant rep. And I'm thinking, well, none of these landlords are going to want to talk to tenant reps because they're going to have to pay the commission. And they can go directly with, the company itself and basically have a better deal done. And it turned out it was the exact opposite. They actually wanted the tenant rep, to be part of this discussion because they could all talk their real estate lingo and, get a deal done quicker and so on and so forth. So that's why I asked that question. And maybe someday, you'll be in that tenant rep scenario where it'll be welcomed, where you can have a discussion with the physician and it won't be a problem. So back to the lawsuit thing real quick, do you have to, when a family signs up with you, are there powers of attorney and, all that other stuff that they have to, have you, sign on to? And I assume you have your own liability insurance and everything else.
Yeah. Great question. So I do have my own liability insurance and I have a very detailed agreement. I try to tell my clients it's an agreement, not a contract, because you don't need to, you're not a gym member now for 3 years and now you can't get out of it. So it's nothing like that, or AT&T or whatever. So yes, I make it very clear, and it's in my agreement as well, that if I'm not working directly, and oftentimes I'm not, if the payer is not my actual patient, and and oftentimes, like I said, it's a family member. So I've had cases where it's the daughter of her, her dad is in the ICU, intubated. Clearly, he's not going to be able to sign the agreement, right? So I have to, at that point, get some type of legal documentation that says that they are the healthcare surrogate or the medical power of attorney or something where that person has given you the right to make decisions. One of those decisions being to hire me into their care. If they don't have that and we are in a position where they can't get it right now because obviously, the loved one's intubated or whatever, I can't get involved, and I can't legally get involved because if that person wouldn't have wanted me involved and didn't give the legal right to their family member to make that decision, then I can't and I don't. And that's happened a few times where their paperwork just doesn't exist and the person cannot execute it. Most of the time, thankfully, I think the word has gotten out that this is a really important thing to do. And so most of the time, people who have come to me have had that already in place. And so they just send me a copy of it and we're okay. But yes, that has to be in place.
So you don't offer, let's say, advocacy light where you're just providing advisory services to the family member. So you're legally not bound with everything, but you're advising, let's say the daughter in this case, to ask this, this, and this.
Yes. So I do like advocacy light. I haven't called it that, but maybe I will. It's like Bud Light, but I'm kidding. I'm not even a beer drinker. But so I have offered that, and I do often tell people I can still help you in a limited capacity without I won't be able to access any records of your loved one. And we're going to talk more from a general standpoint. And so, yes, if you want to sit with me for an hour and, I'll talk you through the hierarchy of the system, who to contact, but I won't be able to physically do any of the work, but I will guide you through what to do. And so, yes, I have done that. I probably say a good handful of times where I've just kind of walked them through how to navigate it themselves, but I can't actually get into the weeds of it.
And is there a certain family profile or patient profile that you primarily deal with as your secret sauce, so to speak?
It's really all across the board. I would say what has been surprising is some that I wasn't necessarily expecting is younger entrepreneurs who, left a corporate job, opened and started their own business with the intention of having a, more flexible, lighter lifestyle and started working themselves too hard. And now we're facing, difficult, scary diagnoses and at a very young age. So I was expecting more of, just based on, experience and whatever, was the, adult child calling on their, elderly parent, those types of situations, which I would say has probably been a good vast majority. But no, I've had pediatrics, 6 years old. I've had young entrepreneurs. It's literally all across the board. And it really just boils down to who is feeling like they have exhausted all of their options and is like, I just need some help. I just need some help and I just need to find it. And whatever their search terms are, sometimes I ask people, how did you find me? So, some people are like, I just searched pharmacist help. And I'm like, I don't know how I came up from that. But some people do know the term advocate. They know the term healthcare advocate, patient advocate, but not everybody does. And sometimes they'll learn it from their Google searching. But no, it's all across the board.
And do you also provide referral services? For example, you talked earlier about the family that's in a rural area and let's say they need to go to Mayo or Cleveland Clinic or what have you. Are you navigating that for them as well?
If they want me to. So what I tell my clients is I will get as involved as you want me to. So, I bill by the hour. So I will work within a monetary budget. I will work with, and some people are like, just do it, 'cause I am done. Like I'm tapped out. So then in that case I will. And, at some point, I'll get to a point where they will, as the patient, have to step in and do the rest. But like, I'll get them, connected to the patient coordinator of the second opinion that we're seeking, or, I'll get them as far as I can get them, and then they have to do their part. But yeah, so I will go as far with them as they want, and that is largely dictated by them. If they're like, let's not go that far, but just tell me what the next step is. So I'll just tell them, here's the next steps, 1, 2, 3, what to do. Let me know if you run into any trouble. Then they take it, and then they call me if they run into any trouble.
Obviously, you've been in the healthcare world for a while. And at Optimal Bio, Dr. Brandon talks a lot about, and there's data that supports this, that our patient population is getting sicker and sicker. I assume you agree with that. And if so, what are you seeing more of that you didn't see as much of, when you first got into not only your business, but before that, when you were a clinical pharmacist?
What I'm realizing is the interplay of mind and body more, but I don't necessarily know that it's happening more. I just am more aware of it and realizing how little it's addressed and identified. And so, there's a saying that the issues lie in the tissues. And I think that there's some truth to that. A lot of people come into their symptomatology with, and I have several clients where this is the case, significant childhood trauma or, just difficult relationship dynamics in their life, whether it's parents or spouses or whatever. And the medical system is doing what it does, which is, okay, you're coming in with, these 3 pockets of symptoms, your heart, and then, okay, now you're tired. So let me send you the endocrinologist for your thyroid. And now and so you've got all these specialists looking at just their little piece of the pie. And that initial questionnaire might have asked a few questions that nobody's reading it. And so nobody really even knows how to tie in. My notation on my clients goes back to tell me about your child. Let's go. And I'm not a therapist, but I want to know what we're dealing with so that I can guide you to the right people, because okay, I think there's an interplay here of some factors that aren't being addressed. And so let's find the specialists who actually are able to do that. Because I know, even from experience, and maybe you do as well, when my dad was sick and we were in hospice, and, that was pretty traumatic for me. And I was having all kinds of, I'm otherwise healthy. I'm very attentive to my health. And I was, I had a cyst on the base of my, dominant index finger, and orthopedic surgeons wanted to cut it out, and I maybe would lose all this stuff, and I'm like, I don't think I'm doing that. So I went to acupuncture, and once I worked through my grief and I went to some acupuncture sessions, that went away completely. No sign of it, not yet to return. I mean, that's a minor thing, but it just highlights how much our emotions are tied to how our body responds. And that's being largely missed, I would say. And I see that in my clients. And a lot of clients, once we've exhausted the Western medical system, which, doesn't take too long to realize that happens. A lot of them end up going to, and I'll recommend, it's always up to them. I don't make their decisions, but I will suggest that maybe we take a functional medicine approach. Let's look at another way of approaching this. And then we start to get, more labs, and we start to realize we have significant deficiencies and, some important vitamins and minerals, and not just vitamin D, which vitamin D is super important, but, beyond that, we might have some, significant gut dysbiosis, and just the Western system isn't made to deal with these things or look at them. And so I think we really have. And I didn't know this when my dad was sick. I didn't know that. I didn't know any of it. I just was like, okay, next chemo. That one doesn't work. And how many times do we hear a chemo? I mean, we could have an entire conversation about that. But I mean, how many times do we hear somebody say chemo doesn't work? I mean, that's the sky is blue. So, in any case, see, I can really go on a soapbox. You gotta rein me in. So, but I hope I answered your question probably more than you wanted.
No, that was good. So, but to your point about chemo, I mean, being in the cancer research world for a while, there were some good therapies that worked for specific, types of cancers. But in general, the technology really hasn't changed in the last, 20 or 30 years. And as they say, the chemo kills you before the actual disease does. So is the goal then, in some cases where you mentioned earlier, you're exhausting Western medicine, it's to maybe get the patient on the right path, stabilize that patient, or whatever word you want to describe. And then, okay, now let's look at, maybe some alternative ways that might be able to eventually cure you, as opposed to you just being on this maintenance, for, the next upteenth years.
Yeah. So I would say the vast majority come to me sort of in the fire, right? And so I'm jumping in the fire with them and we're in crisis mode. And I think Western medicine in general does a pretty good job in crisis mode. Like if we need surgery, if we need a spleen out, if we need, our heart valves replaced, I mean, the reality is an acupuncturist isn't going to be able to do that. So I think we realize the strengths of the Western system and what stage we're in our health. And if we're in crisis mode and we need the amazing, advancements of the Western system, fantastic. Once we get out of crisis mode, though, oftentimes what happens is we are not on a great track for long-term sustainability of health, optimizing health, even sustaining a baseline of health. And so it's like, well, we did your surgery, so that's all we got, unless you want another surgery, like there's not a whole lot of options, or like, 5 more medications. So once we're at that point, okay, we're out of crisis mode, we're out of the acute stage. Now let's see how much we can optimize it. Because by this point, by the time people call me, they've like forgotten what it is to even feel healthy. They don't even know what it feels, what it is to feel well anymore. And so they've, in some ways, accepted like, okay, we got through the crisis. Okay, well, then this is just my life now. Well, maybe, but maybe we haven't looked at all the options yet. And maybe there are some deficiencies you have and things that we can work on that would optimize your wellness. And so, we move away from what Western medicine can provide us if they want to. I give them the option, and we move towards, some other options. Maybe they have chronic pain, and acupuncture, even if it doesn't take away their entirety of need of opioids, even if it lowers it a little bit, and even if we can just chip away a little bit and get you to a better state. So, but in the beginning, we're in crisis mode.
I heard from a doctor that when they went to medical school, there wasn't one nutritious course that was offered. Nutrition course, not nutritious, that was offered. And even today, it just, with all the knowledge that's out there, it just seems like a lot of the doctors don't, think about nutrition other than if you're a cancer patient, for example, just making sure you get enough calories. But it could be through ice cream, it could be through processed meats, it could be for whatever. And the question I have for you, with, of course, the exception of your husband, because I'm sure he's different than a traditional physician, but with all the knowledge the medical profession has, if they get sick, do they end up going the traditional medicine route as well? Or are they doing things differently that we should be doing?
Yeah, there's a lot to that. Nutrition is not, it's getting better. I'm very hopeful. There's actually medical schools now, one in South Carolina, and I'm blanking on which school it is, but it's a school in South Carolina that actually has a lifestyle medicine track, and they actually have the medical students like growing their own food, and they bring in chefs to show them how to make healthy food, and it's like a whole new world. So that makes me very hopeful. But that's like one of, however many medical schools there are. So we're still a long way, but we're moving in the right direction. I would say it's really, I think I, kind of alluded to this in the beginning. And so it's really hard for people in the medical field, healthcare professionals, to work one way, because that's what they have to do in the system they're in. So to work one way, which is medication for every ailment, and then a medication for every side effect of every ailment, or every other medication. It's hard for them to do that and then leave and not believe in that. And now think, well, if I get sick, I'm going to do it a different way. That's a really hard mental space to be in. It's easier to just believe, just hope to God what you're doing is right, because I want to feel like I'm doing right. They do want, I think they're good people, right? I think in general, humans in this field want to feel like they're doing the right thing. They can't feel like they're doing the right thing if they think it's terrible, and if they got sick, they would do something else. So what happens is the vast majority would go to a traditional physician if they got sick, and most of them avoid going to doctors, period, because they don't want to be the doctor that goes to a doctor like that. They don't like to seek out help. But if they needed to seek out help, they would go the traditional route. Most of them. Some of them are starting to realize this isn't working. This isn't working. It's not working for my patients. And so it's not going to work for me either. So they're slowly trickling away. They're starting to let me just study this a little bit. Oh, what's this? What's lifestyle medicine? What's this? And then and what's functional medicine? And so they're slowly trickling away. Some of them becoming functional medicine physicians themselves. Some of them just realizing this isn't working. And then if they get sick, they'll seek others. But I would say the vast majority it's hard. It's hard to work in a traditional system, do things one way and not actually believe in it, because you're having a hard time sleeping at night if you're in that space.
Well, I think too, especially with these big systems, they have to follow a certain protocol too, right?
There's guidelines, right? So there's these, huge organizations, the Society of whatever, Infectious Disease Society of America says, if you've got this infection, you've got to treat it with this antibiotic, yada, yada, guidelines for everything. So if you are not providing what's considered standard of care, which is you're not following the guidelines, then if that person gets sick because of whatever you decided to do, how are you going to stand in court? You have nothing to stand on other than well, that was my intuition. That was my gut. That doesn't stand in court. So they have to avoid being sued, they have to follow these guidelines. And so they are given very little flexibility to do something outside of that, even if they feel that's the right thing to do.
And not to get into a vaccine discussion, but obviously we've seen in the last couple of years a lot of pressure put on, with doctors trying to not necessarily force, but influence, vaccine uptake. And are they getting paid for that? Or is that just another thing where it's the system and they just follow the orders?
It's the system. There's money being exchanged, but not to my knowledge, there's no, doctors aren't getting monetary kickbacks. There's plenty of money to be made, at the other end by the pharmaceutical companies. But yeah, the vaccine discussion is it's a whole other beast to discuss. But I think it highlights the brokenness of the system and where the money goes. That's where the media goes. That's where everything goes. And so that's what we're hearing. That's what people follow. Physicians, nurses, all players of the healthcare profession have been impacted by having to make decisions that they may not have been comfortable with, but they had to keep their job, to whatever. And then also, if they aren't asking their patients, if they aren't doing what the system tells them to do, did you get a vaccine, and giving them the vaccines and suggesting, encouraging, if they aren't doing that and their patient who maybe didn't want the vaccine, but or if that patient ends up not getting the vaccine because the physician tells them their concerns about it, if that person does not get the vaccine and then gets COVID and then passes away, again, there's the potential for a lawsuit because you did not give that vaccine that could have saved that person. There may have been a very legitimate reason. Maybe that person has a history of Guillain-Barré syndrome and, there could have been a legitimate reason. It doesn't matter. That's the sad thing, is it just doesn't matter.
Yeah. And I know you can always sue for anything. And I was just thinking during this whole time that, some patient comes in, doctor, they give their spiel, and then patient says no and signs a legal document basically saying that I'm, giving you and I'm identifying you for any liability around this. And but the bigger puzzle before the vaccine was just the fact of this protocol that came down from on high on how to treat COVID patients, which was, if you feel bad, go home. And if you get really bad, come in and, and then we'll try to take care of you. But there's no in between. And then some of the maverick doctors out there, so to speak, were, treating and having success. And, they were basically taking to the woodshed for the most part. So to me, that's the more puzzling thing that still nobody seems to want to answer at this point.
Yes. Yeah. I did a few podcast episodes with a physician who he literally is fallen off the face of, I don't know where he went, but he was trying to be the voice of reason and saying, here are some things that we can do. And I immediately went on his protocol. I was taking my quercetin and my vitamin C and my vitamin D. And I think he got so, canceled or whatever, the terms are these days. And he just stopped talking because he's like, I get it. You want to share a different message until it's just too much and you can't handle it. The kickback is too much. And so it's unfortunate.
So tell us about your podcast. What kind of guests do you have on? What are you trying to get across?
Yeah. So I'm about 4 years in. I took a short sabbatical recently because we just moved and I was just in a tumultuous time of life. But it's called Minding Wellness. And I basically bring on guests to educate and spread awareness of alternative modalities. So the majority of the time it's somebody who does energy healing or somebody, and I try to rein in it's not like completely not evidence-based woo-woo. So, but it is information on treatment modalities that have helped countless other people. I brought on a hypnotist, which I've never done hypnotherapy, and 5 years ago I would have said that's crazy talk. And I said that on the podcast. Like I'm trying to be really open-minded, but to me, it's hard for me to wrap my head around what you do. And so, but I want people to know what options are out there. And I want to ask the hard questions of my guests of, what is this doing? What kind of results are you seeing, and what is the scientific reasoning and justification behind this? And so I bring on a lot of guests. I also bring on a lot of patients who just want to share their story and what has happened and what has helped them and the struggles that they've gone through. And I actually have brought on a few controversial guests about the vaccine, Dr. Polevsky and Moskowitz, and a few who have shared their different views. And I brought on Chris Wark from Chris Beat Cancer. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he has taken a different route for his treatment of his colon cancer, and is spreading awareness of that. And so just a variety of topics, but it's all pretty much mind, body, spirit is the goal, but also things that you wouldn't expect to hear from a pharmacist. I have brought on 0 pharmaceutical manufacturers.
And you're not sponsored by them either.
I'm sponsored by nobody. Yes, correct.
So if one wants to take a listen, where can they find you?
So Minding Wellness on any of your podcast platforms. So my website is peaceadvocacygroup.com, which is super long, but hindsight, I could have made that super easy, like all the, cool, just one name things, but it is what it is. So PEACE advocacygroup.com. All of the podcast episodes live there, but they also live on all of the traditional places. So you go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you go, just search for Minding Wellness.
Fantastic. So we always ask our guests to give us 5 takeaways, life advice, based on your experiences. Doesn't have to be life advice. It could be workout advice, diets, whatever. So the floor is yours.
5. Yeah. Well, it's funny. I just thought about when I interviewed Chris Wark, and I said, if you were going to go, because he's really lives a really nutritious lifestyle, if you're going to go to an island and you can only bring one food, what would you bring? And he said broccoli. So eat more greens. That's what Chris Wark says. I know that would not be my first choice. Broccoli is a very love-hate thing, and I'm on the hate spectrum, but I try really hard because I know it's so beneficial. Okay, eat the rainbow is number 1, which I know has become cliche, but I can tell you from being a kid who never ate vegetables, and I mean, my parents, they're like, she doesn't like vegetables, so we just don't feed her vegetables. And they were not the parents who were forcing it down my throat, which I think opened my eyes later to not have, a weird emotional feeling about it. I just was like, I didn't like it then, but let me try it now. I have read enough, learned enough that what you put in your mouth is either going to harm you or it's going to hurt you. And you're so much better if you're consuming the vast majority. And you don't have to go fully plant-based and completely get rid of meat or whatever, unless you've got a specific diet for yourself. I just say be more plant forward. Just whatever you can do to get more plants in your diet, even if you want the occasional hamburger, because people feel very restricted by all of the rules these days. So diet is number 1. And I don't even like the word diet, just increasing the nutritional value of the foods that you consume. With regard to your body, whatever you can do to move it. It doesn't matter if all it is walk down to the end of the street, then walk down to the end of the street until you can walk a little bit further, but move your body, because a body in motion stays in motion, and that's just the reality. And I think our culture, with all this CrossFit, and people feel like unless they do these crazy, wild, Ironman triathlons, whatever, then what's the point? But I've spoken to, and I interviewed a doctor on my podcast he started this walk with a doc program, and he's like, just walk. That's all you have to do. You don't have to go, if you don't want to go lift weights, or you don't want to do a triathlon, you don't want to swim, just walk. And so he walks with his patients, actually show up and they walk with him, which is great. So nutrition, walking, I would say 3rd, and this is in really no order, although nutrition is really important. So we'll just keep that first. What you consume in your mind is so important, arguably sometimes more important than even what you're consuming by your mouth. But our mindset can make or break us. And oftentimes what I work with my clients is their mindset around their health, the vision that they have for their health, but also their mindset working with the medical teams. A lot of times they are taking a very, passive approach, or they don't feel like they have any control in the situation. And they're just going from visit to visit to visit, waiting for the next, directive or, demand of them or whatever, or the next prescription. But the way that you approach healthcare and your role in it is super, super important. And so your mindset around your healthcare. And then I'll say fourth, I'm going to add mindset again, just your mindset in general in your personal life as well. I tell people, I hardly ever have the TV on. If you're all day consuming news, you're consuming negativity, because that's what sells. That's what the media is selling you. And so if the TV is on, I'm confused. If the TV is on in my house, I'm like, who's watching this? And does it need to be watched right now? Because otherwise I don't want it on. There's nothing of value to me on the TV. And so I'm usually listening to podcasts that are very tailored to what I want to listen to. Information is fine, but when it's twisted in a negative way, you're consuming that all day, and you are living your life out of fear all day long. We're afraid to do anything the media tells us to be afraid of. And so it's so, so important to be filling your mind with positive things, and not, Pollyanna, ridiculous things, but just life in general. Life is pretty good. We have bumps and bruises and we have obstacles, but most of us are living a life that many in other countries would only pray for. And so, and then fifth, I would say gratitude. Have some type of a gratitude / potentially meditation if you want to do your gratitude through meditation, but some type of a gratitude practice. It doesn't have to be, something at 5 a.m. in the morning, or, some morning routine that somebody told you to do, but have some time in the day. And I practice this with my son. As soon as your mind starts spiraling, what can I be grateful for right now? Because you can't live in anxiety and gratitude at the same time. So it's a quick switch that doesn't take you, going to the Tibetan mountains and meditating. You can quickly switch. If I can just think of 3 things that I'm grateful for right now, all of a sudden you forgot what you were anxious about. So I could probably go on and on, but there's are some.
Yeah, it's great stuff. Do you have an Instagram handle?
I'm not super active on Instagram. I do. Peace Advocacy Group is on there. I'm not super, super active. Okay. I've been encouraged to be, but you can find me, Peace Advocacy Group, on there.
All right. Well, ladies
and gentlemen, LinkedIn is the better place to find me.
Sounds good. Claudia, thank you for everything today. You've been a great guest, and best of luck with your business. And because the more successful you are, the more help you're going to give the patients out there to hopefully become healthier and better as well. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Jim.
This has been a production of Optimal Bio. Optimal Bio is CEO Tyler Brandon, podcast host and partner Jim Baker, medical director Greg Brandon, production assistance by Core Media, Beth Grabencourt, administrator, Kevin Duthu, executive producer. The podcast can be found on our website, optimalbio.com, on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Our theme song is Sunwave by Paradiso, provided by Epidemic Sound.